first of all, Gerald Nadler, I've known him a long time. He's a sleazebag. Everybody knows that. Pat Cipollone is a high-quality human being. I was very impressed with Pat. He had great emotion yesterday. Pat's a brilliant guy, but I've never seen that emotion. And that's real emotion. That's because he knows this is a hoax. And I was very proud of the job he did. I've known Jerry Nadler for a long time. He's opposed many of my jobs. I got them all built, very successfully built in New York. But so we have yet another fight. Isn't it amazing? Isn't it surprising? Isn't it amazing? But if you look at other aspects or other parts of your question, I think that I would rather go the long way. I would rather interview Bolton. I would rather interview a lot of people. The problem with John is that it's a national security problem. You can't have somebody who's at national security. And if you think about it, John, he knows some of my thoughts. He knows what I think about leaders. What happens if he reveals what I think about a certain leader, and it's not very positive?
All right, so Willie, this is, of course, while Donald Trump has contributed money to just about every Democrat in New York State, from Anthony Weiner to Elliott, former governor,
Spitzer,
Elliott Spitzer, to Hillary Clinton 8 times. Gave money to Hillary Clinton 8 times. Said she was a great Secretary of State.
That's nice of him.
Gave money to Charlie Rangel. Listen, if you were a liberal in New York, Donald Trump would write you checks. He did not, though. With a notable exception was Jerry Nadler, because in the 1980s, Donald Trump purchased some railroad property on the Lower West Side, I believe it was, of Manhattan, and he wanted to develop it. And Jerry Nadler did not want it developed. And so that battle between these two gentlemen have been going on for 40 years, and it's one reason why Nadler is the only Democrat, it seems, in New York State that can't brag about getting a campaign check from Donald J. Trump.
Joe, we're going to double check this, but it looks like he may have given $500 to Jerry Nadler in 1989 for a city comptroller race, but I'm going to double check that.
So he contributed money to a sleazebag.
Well,
he says.
Yeah, he just said he was a.
He said he was a sleazebag, and yet he contributed money to him. Well, so you can even get in a fight with Donald Trump if you're a New York liberal, and he still gave you money. Isn't that fascinating?
Isn't it amazing how the petty fights over New York real estate of the 1980s and 90s have been elevated to Davos and to the world stage as the president goes after Jerry Nadler? But I think, Jonathan, maybe more interesting were his comments about John Bolton, where he again was sort of all over the place, where he came out and he said, I'd like a longer trial. I'd like to interview John Bolton myself. But then realizing perhaps what he said, he goes, well, he left on bad terms. By the way, I fired him. He left on bad terms. So that was my decision. So maybe not the best guy to have. Maybe he has bad feelings about our relationship. So he doesn't want John Bolton to testify.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.